She stared at the red F marked across her paper, her hands trembling as tears pooled in her eyes. This wasn't just any assignment. This was her scholarship essay, her ticket to college, her entire future condensed into 5 pages that her teacher claimed were worthless. But here's what made her blood run cold. The pages were pristine, unmarked, without a single correction or comment. Her teacher hadn't read a single word. And when she confronted her about it, what happened next would expose a pattern of discrimination that had been hiding in plain sight for years, destroying the dreams of countless students who looked just like her. Before we dive into what really happened in that classroom, I need to know where you're watching from. Are you in the USA, the UK? Drop your city in the comments right now, because what happened to this young girl could be happening in your community, in your schools, and you need to know the warning signs. Type your location below, and make sure you're subscribed, because this story gets more disturbing with every detail. She was 15 years old, a sophomore at Jefferson High School in a mid-sized American city, and she had spent 3 weeks pouring her heart into that essay. Her name was Maya Richardson, and she was the kind of student teachers usually loved, always sitting in the front row, always raising her hand, always staying after class to ask questions. She maintained a solid B+ average despite working 20 hours a week at a local grocery store to help her single mother pay bills. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she would stock shelves from 6 until 10 at night, then go home to finish homework by flashlight so she wouldn't wake her younger siblings. On weekends, she worked double shifts, standing on her feet for 8 hours, scanning items, bagging groceries, smiling at customers even when exhaustion made her bones ache. Maya had dreams that stretched beyond the limitations of her circumstances. She wanted to be a journalist, to tell stories that mattered, to give voice to communities that were often overlooked. She had started keeping a journal when she was 10 years old, filling notebook after notebook with observations about the world around her, about the injustices she witnessed, about the resilience she saw in her community. She would clip articles from newspapers she found at the library, studying how professional journalists structured their stories, how they balanced facts with humanity, how they made readers care about people they had never met. Her English teacher, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, was supposed to be her mentor, the person who would help her refine her craft and prepare for college applications. Mrs. Holloway had taught at Jefferson High for 17 years and had a reputation among parents as a dedicated, experienced educator who demanded excellence from her students. She had taught advanced placement English, had served on curriculum committees, had letters of recommendation from former students who credited her with their academic success. Parents fought to get their children into her classes. The school administration held her up as an example of teaching excellence. She had won Teacher of the Year twice in her tenure. The assignment was straightforward: write a personal narrative essay that could serve as a foundation for college application materials. The prompt asked students to discuss a challenge they had overcome and how it shaped their world. You, Mrs. Holloway, had spent 2 class periods explaining the assignment, emphasizing the importance of showing rather than telling, of using specific sensory details, of finding the universal truth within personal experience. She had distributed a detailed rubric outlining exactly what she expected, from thesis clarity to grammatical precision. She had promised her students that this assignment would be one of the most important pieces of writing they would do in high school, that she would give each essay the attention it deserved, that her feedback would help them grow as writers. Maya knew exactly what she wanted to write about. She wrote about the summer her father left, how her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep their apartment, how Maya had learned to cook dinner for her younger siblings at age 11, how she had discovered that resilience wasn't just about surviving, but about choosing hope, even when everything felt hopeless. She wrote about the night she had found her mother crying in the bathroom, how she had held her mother's hand and promised they would be okay, how that moment had transformed her from a child into someone who understood the weight of responsibility. She wrote about learning to make spaghetti with butter and garlic when there was no money for sauce, about walking her 8-year old brother to school every morning while her mother slept after working the overnight shift at the hospital, about reading bedtime stories to her 6-year-old sister, even when she had 3 chapters of history homework still waiting. She wrote about walking to the public library every day that summer because it was air-conditioned and free, how she had stumbled upon a collection of essays by James Baldwin, how his words had shown her that writing could be both beautiful and revolutionary. She wrote about sitting in the corner of the library's reading room, discovering notes of a native son, feeling like someone had finally put words to feelings she had carried but could never articulate. She wrote about how Baldwin's essays had taught her that writing about personal pain could become writing about universal truth, that her story, her family's story, mattered beyond just their own experience. She wrote about deciding, at 12 years old, that she would become a writer who told the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. Maya spent 3 weeks on that essay. She wrote 5 drafts, each one tighter and more focused than the last. The first draft was too angry, too raw. The second was too distant, too analytical. The third started to find the balance between emotion and reflection. The fourth refined the language, sharpened the details. The fifth was the one she felt proud of, the one that captured both the pain of that summer and the strength she had discovered within herself. She stayed up past midnight reading her words aloud, listening for rhythm and flow, making sure every sentence earned its place on the page. She cut entire paragraphs that she loved because they didn't serve the narrative. She rewrote her opening 6 times until it pulled readers immediately into her story. She asked her mother to read it, and her mother had cried, telling her was the most beautiful thing she had ever read. Her mother had held the pages carefully, as if they were precious, and said, "Baby, this is it. This is your voice. This is going to open doors for you." Maya felt proud of that essay in a way she had never felt proud of schoolwork before. She believed she had created something meaningful, something that represented who she was and who she wanted to become. She had poured not just her writing skills into those pages, but her heart, her history, her hopes. She submitted the essay on a Monday morning, 2 days before the deadline, because she wanted to give Mrs. Holloway plenty of time to read it carefully. The rubric stated that essays would be graded on thesis clarity, narrative structure, use of descriptive detail, grammar and mechanics, and overall impact. Mrs. Holloway had emphasized in class that she read every essay thoroughly and provided detailed feedback because she believed good writing required good editing. She had told them, "I will read every word you write. I will give you the feedback you need to improve. This is how you grow as writers, through careful revision based on thoughtful criticism." Maya had handed in her essay with confidence, with hope, with the belief that Mrs. Holloway would see her potential and help her reach even higher. She had imagined getting the essay back covered in comments, suggestions for improvement, praise for what worked well. She had imagined conversations during office hours about how to develop her voice even further, about college application strategies, about journalism programs she should consider. She had trusted that her teacher would be her advocate, her guide. Friday afternoon arrived, and Mrs. Holloway handed back the essays. The classroom buzzed with anticipation. Students had been talking about this assignment for weeks, knowing it was their most important piece of writing so far. Maya watched as her classmates opened their papers, some smiling at good grades, others wincing at criticism. She saw Jennifer, who sat 2 rows over, grinning at an A on her paper. She saw David pumping his fist when he saw a B+. She saw Emma frowning at a C but nodding as she read through Mrs. Holloway's extensive comments. She waited eagerly for her own paper, confident that even if the grade wasn't perfect, she would receive the kind of constructive feedback that would help her improve. When Mrs. Holloway reached her desk, she placed the essay face down and moved on without making eye contact. That small gesture made Maya's stomach tighten. Why face down? Why no eye contact? Every other student had received their papers face up. had exchanged a smile or a nod with the teacher. But Maya got nothing, just the back of a paper and Mrs. Holloway's retreating figure. She slowly turned the paper over and saw it. A large red F circled at the top. Below it, in Mrs. Holloway's handwriting, were 3 sentences. This essay does not meet the requirements of the assignment. The narrative lacks focus and fails to demonstrate college-level writing. See me if you have questions. Maya's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was seeing. An F. She had never received an F in her entire academic career. Not in elementary school, not in middle school, never. She had gotten B, minuses that disappointed her, C, pluses that frustrated her, but never, ever an F. An F wasn't just a bad grade. An F meant failure. An F meant her work was worthless. She flipped through the 5 pages, searching for comments, corrections, suggestions, anything that would explain this grade. The pages were blank except for that brutal assessment at the top. No marks on her carefully crafted opening, no comments on her descriptions of that difficult summer, no notes about grammar or structure or word choice. Nothing, just those 3 dismissive sentences and the red F that seemed to pulse with judgment. Her chest felt tight. Her hands started to shake. She felt heat rising to her face, felt tears beginning to form. Around her, other students were chatting about their grades, some complaining about points deducted for comma splices or unclear topic sentences. Their papers were covered in green ink, Mrs. Holloway's detailed comments filling the margins. She could see Jessica's paper from where she sat, covered with notes like great sensory detail here. This metaphor works beautifully. Consider expanding this paragraph. Excellent transition. Maya's paper had nothing. Just that F and those 3 dismissive sentences that gave her no path forward, no understanding of what had gone wrong, no acknowledgement that she had spent 3 weeks of her life on this work. She raised her hand, her voice shaking. Mrs. Holloway, I don't understand my grade. Mrs. Holloway looked up from her desk, her expression neutral, almost bored. I wrote my comments on the paper, Maya. The essay didn't meet the requirements. But what specifically was wrong with it? There aren't any marks or corrections on the pages. I don't have time to discuss this right now. Class is ending in 5 minutes. Make an appointment to see me during office hours if you need clarification. The dismissal stung almost as much as the grade itself. Maya looked around and saw that Mrs. Holloway had spent 10 minutes just moments ago discussing Rachel's essay, going over every suggestion in detail. But for Maya, there was no time, just those 5 minutes remaining in class, as if her concerns didn't warrant more than that. The bell rang. Students gathered their belongings and filed out. Maya sat frozen at her desk, staring at the F. She felt humiliated, confused, angry. She had worked so hard. She had followed every guideline. How could this essay, the one her mother had cried over, the one she had poured 3 weeks of effort into, be failing work? What had she missed? What had she done wrong? The lack of specific feedback left her spiraling, unable to identify what needed improvement, unable to see a path forward. After school, Maya went directly to Mrs. Holloway's classroom during office hours. 2 other students were already there, both white girls from her class, both receiving detailed explanations of their grades. Maya waited in the hallway, listening through the open door as Mrs. Holloway patiently walked them through revision strategies, pointing out specific sentences that could be strengthened, praising the parts that worked well. She heard Mrs. Holloway say to one student, "This paragraph right here, this is beautiful writing. You have such a gift for description. I just want you to apply that same level of detail throughout the entire essay." She heard warmth in her teacher's voice, encouragement, genuine engagement with the work. Maya waited for 35 minutes. She timed it, watching the clock on the wall tick forward as Mrs. Holloway gave those 2 students the kind of attention Maya desperately needed. When they finally left, both smiling, both thanking Mrs. Holloway for her help, Maya entered the classroom. Finally, it was Maya's turn. She approached Mrs. Holloway's desk with her essay in hand, that red F seeming even larger now. "Mrs. Holloway, I really need to understand what was wrong with my essay. I worked on this for 3 weeks. I don't see any specific feedback on the pages." Mrs. Holloway sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested she was dealing with an unreasonable student who was wasting her time. "Maya, the essay simply wasn't college-level work. The narrative was unfocused. You didn't adequately address the prompt." "But what does that mean specifically? Which parts were unfocused?" "I wrote about overcoming the challenge of my father leaving and how it taught me resilience. That directly addresses the prompt. You said to write about a challenge we overcame and how it shaped us. That's exactly what I did." "The execution was poor. Look, not every student is cut out for advanced writing. Perhaps you should consider whether journalism is really the right path for you. Have you thought about other career options? There are many fields that might be better suited to your abilities." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She felt her face grow hot, felt her throat tighten. "Are you saying I'm not smart enough to be a writer?" "I'm saying that this essay demonstrates that you're not ready for college-level work. That's just the reality, Maya. Sometimes we have to adjust our expectations based on our actual abilities. It's better to face these truths now than to pursue a path that will only lead to disappointment later." Maya took a breath, trying to stay calm, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can you show me specific examples of what's wrong? Point to sentences or paragraphs that need work, because I want to revise it. I want to improve. That's why I'm here. I'm not asking you to change my grade without me earning it. I just need to understand what to fix." Mrs. Holloway's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I've already spent considerable time evaluating your work. The grade stands. If you have concerns about my grading practices, you're welcome to speak with the department head, but I assure you my assessment is fair and accurate. I've been teaching for 17 years, Maya. I know quality writing when I see it, and I know when a student has missed the mark. But you haven't shown me where I missed the mark. There's nothing on these pages. How am I supposed to improve if you won't tell me what's wrong?" The issues are pervasive throughout the essay. I don't have time to annotate every problem. Now, I have other students waiting and papers to grade. If that's all, I need you to leave so I can continue my work. Maya left that classroom feeling something shift inside her. This wasn't just about a bad grade. Something was deeply wrong. She had read enough essays, had received enough feedback from previous teachers to know that her work wasn't failing. Last year, her English teacher, Mr. Chen, had praised her writing constantly, had encouraged her to enter essay contests, had told her parents at conferences that Maya had exceptional talent. The year before that, Ms. Rodriguez had written on her report card that Maya was one of the strongest writers she had taught in her career. And now, suddenly, she was being told she wasn't cut out for writing at all. And the complete absence of specific criticism felt deliberate, as though Mrs. Holloway had decided on the grade without actually engaging with what Maya had written. How could someone spend 17 years teaching English and not be able to point to a single specific problem in 5 pages of writing? Even terrible essays had identifiable issues: weak thesis statements, poor organization, grammatical errors, lack of supporting details. But Mrs. Holloway couldn't name even one specific problem with Maya's essay. That evening, Maya did something bold. She removed her name from the essay, replaced it with a fake name, Sarah Mitchell, and gave it to her mother to share with her mother's friend, Ms. Jennifer Park, an English professor at the local community college. Maya told her mother not to mention who wrote it, just to ask for an honest professional assessment. She needed to know if she was crazy, if her perception of her own work was completely wrong, if Mrs. Holloway was right, and she simply lacked the ability to see her own failures. 3 days later, Ms. Park sent back detailed comments. She had marked the essay with extensive notes, praising the opening hook, the sensory details, the emotional authenticity. She wrote in the margins, "This moment with your mother is so tender and real." And the Baldwin reference shows sophisticated reading and beautiful use of parallel structure here. She wrote that the essay was compelling, mature, and well-structured. She suggested minor revisions for clarity in 2 paragraphs. and noted one section that could be expanded. At the bottom, she wrote, "This is strong college application, level writing. The student who wrote this has real talent. With some polishing, this could be an excellent submission essay. The narrative voice is distinctive and honest. The reflection on resilience feels earned, not manufactured. I'd give this a solid A. Please tell this student to keep writing. They have something important to say." Maya showed her mother the feedback. Her mother stared at the two essays side by side, the one with Ms. Park's encouraging comments and the one with Mrs. Holloway's F. Her mother's face darkened with anger, her hands forming fists. "Baby, something's not right here. That teacher didn't read your work. She couldn't have. No one who actually read this essay could call it failing work. Either she didn't read it, or she decided to fail you before she even looked at it." Maya felt validation, but also a growing sense of dread. If her mother was right, if Mrs. Holloway truly hadn't read her work or had graded it unfairly, then what did that mean? Why would a teacher do that? What had Maya done to deserve such treatment? Maya decided to do something she had never done before. She would test her theory. If Mrs. Holloway wasn't actually reading student work, Maya would prove it. She needed evidence, not just suspicions. She needed something undeniable. The next assignment was a literary analysis essay on To Kill a Mockingbird. Maya wrote two versions. The first was her real essay, carefully analyzed, properly cited, thoughtfully argued. She spent hours on it, analyzing the symbolism of the mockingbird, examining how Harper Lee used Scout's perspective to critique racial injustice, discussing how the novel's structure mirrored Scout's moral development. She included quotes from literary critics, referenced specific passages, built a sophisticated argument about how Lee's choice to set the story in the past allowed her to critique both historical and contemporary racism simultaneously. The second was a deliberately bad essay, filled with plot summary instead of analysis, containing factual errors about the novel, lacking any thesis statement, organized chaotically, and including a full paragraph copied word for word from Spark Notes, a plagiarism that should be immediately obvious to any teacher who actually read the work. She made the plagiarized paragraph particularly obvious, using sophisticated vocabulary that didn't match the rest of the essay's simple language, and she didn't even bother to adjust the formatting, leaving in the Spark Notes citation style that differed from the form at Mrs. Holloway required. She submitted her real essay under her own name. Then she convinced her friend Jessica, a white student who consistently received A's from Mrs. Holloway, to submit the plagiarized version under Jessica's name. Jessica was hesitant but agreed, curious to see what would happen. "This feels wrong," Jessica said, "but I want to know if what you're saying is true, because if it is, that's terrifying." 2 weeks later, the essays came back. Maya received a C with a brief note. "Analysis is superficial. You need to engage more deeply with the text." Her actual essay, which she had spent hours researching and writing, her essay that built a complex argument about narrative perspective and social criticism, was dismissed with that single sentence. No specific examples. No guidance on how to improve. No acknowledgement of the literary criticism she had incorporated or the sophisticated argument she had constructed. Jessica received a B+. Mrs. Holloway's comments praised her insightful observations and strong textual evidence. Despite the essay containing plagiarized material and factual errors about the plot, the essay had claimed that Tom Robinson was acquitted, which was factually wrong. It had referred to Scout's brother as Jim instead of Jem. It had described Boo Radley as the main antagonist, when he was actually a reclusive protector. None of these obvious errors had been caught. The plagiarism had gone completely unnoticed. Jessica stared at her grade in shock, her face pale. "Maya, this doesn't make sense. Your essay was so much better than this one. I don't understand what's happening. I felt dirty even submitting this piece of garbage," and she gave it a B+. "I literally copied a paragraph from Spark Notes. She should have failed me. She should have reported me for plagiarism." How did she not notice? Meyer understood. The pattern was becoming clear, undeniable, terrifying in its implications. She started paying closer attention to Mrs. Holloway's grading patterns, to her classroom behavior, to every interaction. She noticed that the 3 black students in the class, herself included, consistently received lower grades with minimal feedback, while white students received higher grades with extensive comments. She noticed that Mrs. Holloway called on black students less frequently during discussions, often ignoring raised hands. She noticed that when black students raised their hands with questions, Mrs. Holloway's answers were curt and dismissive, while white students received patient, detailed explanations. She noticed that Mrs. Holloway smiled more at white students, used their names more often, made eye contact more frequently. Maya started keeping a tally. In one class period, Mrs. Holloway called on white students 17 times and black students twice, despite black students raising their hands just as frequently. When Marcus asked a question about metaphor in the novel they were reading, Mrs. Holloway said, "It's in the text. Read more carefully." When Sarah, a white student, asked virtually the same question 10 minutes later, Mrs. Holloway spent 5 minutes explaining the concept with examples and enthusiasm. Maya talked to Marcus and Jasmine, the other 2 black students in the class. Marcus nodded immediately when she brought up her suspicions. "I've been feeling that all year, but I thought I was just being paranoid. My parents told me I was being too sensitive, that I just needed to work harder. But she hates everything I write, and she never tells me why. Just vague comments about quality. I got a D on my last essay, and the only comment was needs improvement. On what? How? I have no idea." Jasmine pulled out her essays, a stack of papers with consistently low grades and minimal feedback. The 3 of them compared grades and feedback, spreading their papers across the library table during lunch. The pattern was undeniable. All 3 were strong students in their other classes. Marcus had an A in his AP history class, was getting praised constantly by his math teacher. Jasmine was in honors science and consistently scored in the top 10% on standardized tests. Maya maintained a B+ average across all her other subjects. All 3 had received high marks in English classes with other teachers, but in Mrs. Holloway's class, they were all struggling, all receiving grades that didn't reflect the quality of their work, all getting minimal feedback that made improvement impossible. They compared their papers with papers from white students who agreed to share their work. The contrast was stark. White students with weaker arguments got higher grades. White students with grammatical errors still received B's and A's, their mistakes marked gently with suggestions for improvement. Black students with sophisticated analyses received C's and D's with comments like unclear or lacks depth, but no explanation of what was unclear or how to add depth. Maya made a decision. She would document everything. She started keeping copies of all her assignments before submitting them. She saved every graded paper. She began noting the dates and times she asked questions in class and how Mrs. Holloway responded compared to other students. She started recording in a notebook every instance of differential treatment, who got called on, who got praised, whose questions received thorough answers, whose work received detailed feedback. She also did something else. She reached out to students who had taken Mrs. Holloway's class in previous years, through social media, through friends of friends, through younger siblings of former students. She connected with a dozen former students, all black or brown, all reporting similar experiences. They shared stories of being discouraged from advanced classes, told they weren't college material, given low grades without explanation. Some had saved their essays and shared them with Maya. The work was good, sometimes excellent, but marked with failing grades and dismissive comments. One former student, Imani, who had graduated 2 years earlier, told Maya something that made her heart race. "Mrs. Holloway destroyed my confidence. I wanted to major in English in college, but after her class, I thought I couldn't write. She told me I should consider community college instead of 4-year universities, that my writing showed I wasn't ready for university-level work. I almost didn't apply to four-year schools because she convinced me I wasn't smart enough. It wasn't until my first semester at community college, when my professor praised my writing and asked why I wasn't at a university, that I realized she had been wrong about me. He said my essay was one of the best he'd read. From a first-year student, by then I had lost scholarship opportunities because I had applied late to four-year schools. I had to spend 2 years at community college rebuilding my confidence before I transferred. That teacher changed the trajectory of my life. I should be graduating from a four-year university this spring. Instead, I'm just starting my junior year after transferring. Another student, Carlos, shared his experience, his voice tight with remembered anger. She told me I should focus on vocational training instead of college prep classes, said my writing showed I wasn't academically inclined. My counselor believed her and put me in lower-level classes for my junior year. I had to fight for 2 years to get back into college prep courses. My parents had to come to the school multiple times, had to demand meetings with administrators. It was humiliating. I still got into college, but I had to work twice as hard to catch up because she had tracked me into classes that didn't prepare me. I had to take summer school classes to catch up on material I missed. I almost didn't get into the state university because my transcript showed lower-level classes. The stories kept coming, a pattern spanning years. Black and brown students consistently discouraged, undergraded, dismissed. Many had assumed the problem was their own lack of ability. None had thought to question whether the teacher was the problem until Maya reached out. Several admitted that they had changed their career plans based on Mrs. Holloway's assessments, had given up on dreams of journalism or law school or teaching because she had convinced them they weren't smart enough, weren't good enough writers, weren't college material. Maya compiled everything into a document that took her 2 weeks to complete. The comparison of her work with classmates' work, the testimonies from former students, the evidence of the plagiarism test, the professional assessment from Ms. Park that contradicted Mrs. Holloway's evaluation, the tally of classroom participation showing disparate treatment, the collection of graded essays from black students compared to white students. She organized it carefully, added a table of contents, included an executive summary. She wanted this to be undeniable, professional, thorough. She wanted to make sure no one could dismiss it as the complaint of a single disappointed student. She took it to her school counselor first, a young black woman named Ms. Davis, who had always been supportive and had encouraged Maya's journalism aspirations. Ms. Davis listened carefully, her expression growing more troubled with each piece of evidence. She read through the document page by page, sometimes shaking her head, sometimes closing her eyes as if in pain. Maya, this is serious. These are serious allegations. You understand that, right? You're accusing a tenured teacher, a respected member of this faculty, of racial discrimination. This isn't going to be easy. I understand, but it's true. She's not reading our work. She's grading based on something else. And I think that something else is race. Look at the evidence. Look at the pattern. This isn't just about me having hurt feelings over a bad grade. This is systematic. Ms. Davis sat back in her chair, her fingers pressed to her temples. You need to understand that accusing a teacher of racial bias is going to be difficult. Mrs. Holloway has been here for 17 years. She has support from the administration. She's won awards. She has former students who praise her. The principal appointed her to head the English department curriculum committee. This is going to be a battle, Maya, a real battle. Are you prepared for that? I know, but if I don't say something, she's going to keep doing this to other students. How many kids has she convinced they're not smart enough for college? How many dreams has she killed? How many black and brown students has she pushed away from academic success? I can't just sit here with this information and do nothing. That makes me complicit. Ms. Davis nodded slowly, respect and worry mixing in her expression. Okay, let me talk to the principal, but Maya, I need you to be prepared for this to get hard, really hard. You're going to face pushback. Some people are going to call you a troublemaker. Some people are going to say you're just making excuses for your grades. Some students might turn on you. Teachers might treat you differently. This could follow you through the rest of high school. Are you sure you want to do this? Maya thought about Amani, who had lost scholarship opportunities, about Carlos, who had been tracked into lower-level classes, about all the silent victims who had never spoken up because they assumed the problem was them. She thought about the freshmen who would take Mrs. Holloway's class next year, about how many more students would have their confidence destroyed if no one said anything. I'm sure someone has to say something. It might as well be me. The meeting with Principal Thompson happened 2 days later. Maya sat in his office with her mother beside her, her documentation spread across his desk. Her mother had taken off work for this meeting, losing a day's pay she couldn't really afford to lose, but she said, "This is more important than 1 day's wages. This is about your future and every other black child in this school." Principal Thompson was a white man in his late 50s who prided himself on running a tight ship, who liked to talk about discipline and standards and maintaining order. He had pictures on his wall of himself with the superintendent, awards for school performance, certificates of completion from various administrative trainings. He listened to Maya's presentation with an increasingly uncomfortable expression, shifting in his chair, clearing his throat repeatedly, occasionally interrupting to ask questions that seemed designed to poke holes in her argument rather than to understand it. "These are serious accusations, young lady. Mrs. Holloway is one of our most experienced teachers. She's been here since before you were born. She has an impeccable record." Maya's mother spoke up, her voice firm but controlled. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, my daughter has documented evidence here. A college professor evaluated her essay and gave it an A. Mrs. Holloway gave it an F without providing any specific feedback. That's not subjective grading, that's negligence or worse, and it's not just one essay. Look at the pattern, look at the testimonies from former students, look at the evidence of the plagiarism test. This is systematic bias." Principal Thompson picked up the essay with Ms. Park's comments. He read through it slowly, his jaw working, his expression growing more uncomfortable. "I see, and you say Mrs. Holloway didn't provide detailed feedback. Look at the essay," she returned to Maya. Her mother held up the paper with the red F. 3 sentences total, no marks on the actual pages. Meanwhile, other students received extensive comments. My daughter submitted work with obvious plagiarism under another student's name, and it received a B+. How do you explain that? How does a teacher with 17 years of experience not notice plagiarism that a student identified immediately? The principal's jaw tightened. He set down the papers and folded his hands on his desk. "I would need to investigate this thoroughly before making any judgments. These are very serious allegations that could damage a teacher's career and reputation." "Then investigate," Maya said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her, despite the way her hands were shaking under the table. "Look at her grading patterns, talk to former students, look at the demographic breakdown of who succeeds in her class and who doesn't. Look at who gets detailed feedback and who doesn't. The evidence is there if you're willing to see it. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the facts." Principal Thompson's expression suggested he wished this problem would disappear, that he wished Maya had just accepted her grade quietly like students were supposed to do. But he nodded. "I will conduct an investigation, but I want to be clear. If I find that these allegations are baseless, that you have made false accusations against a teacher, there will be consequences for you, Maya. Do you understand that?" The threat hung in the air. Maya's mother's face hardened. "Are you seriously threatening my daughter for advocating for herself and other students? She's documented everything. She's provided evidence, and your response is to threaten her." "I'm simply making clear that false accusations are a serious matter. We take them very seriously here. Then take racial discrimination just as seriously." Her mother shot back. "My daughter has done your job for you. She's documented a pattern of discrimination. Now do the right thing and actually investigate it instead of trying to intimidate a 15-year-old girl into silence." The investigation took 6 weeks. 6 weeks during which Maya's life became increasingly uncomfortable. During that time, her grade remained an F. Mrs. Holloway avoided making eye contact with her in class. The tension was suffocating. News of Maya's complaints spread through the school, and the reaction was mixed. Some classmates started avoiding Maya, uncomfortable with the controversy, not wanting to be associated with someone who had caused trouble. She heard whispers in the hallway. "She's just making excuses. She's playing the race card. Mrs. Holloway is a good teacher. Maya just can't accept that she's not as good a writer as she thinks." Others, including Jessica, supported her quietly, offering words of encouragement in the hallways, sitting with her at lunch when other students avoided her table. Marcus and Jasmine faced similar ostracism. Some teachers started treating Maya differently, more coldly, as if she had committed some unforgivable sin by speaking up. But a few teachers, mostly younger teachers and teachers of color, made a point of being supportive, of letting her know she had done the right thing. The district brought in an external evaluator to review Mrs. Holloway's grading practices from the past 3 years. They examined grade distributions by race. They interviewed current and former students, including several Maya had connected with. They reviewed assignments and the feedback provided. They compared Mrs. Holloway's grading patterns to other English teachers in the school. They looked at whether black students succeeded in other English classes, but struggled specifically in Mrs. Holloway's classes. The findings were damning. Black and brown students in Mrs. Holloway's classes received, on average, grades a full letter grade lower than white students for comparable work. The evaluator found that Mrs. Holloway provided an average of 7 comments per page for white students and fewer than 2 comments per page for students of color. The disparity wasn't subtle. It was glaring, consistent, impossible to explain away as coincidence or as reflecting actual differences in work quality. The evaluator reviewed 20 of Maya's graded assignments from throughout the semester and found that none of them warranted failing grades based on the stated rubrics. In fact, most should have received B's or higher. The evaluator compared Maya's essays to essays from white students who had received A's and found that Maya's work often demonstrated more sophisticated analysis, more careful attention to textual evidence, more mature writing. Yet Maya had consistently received grades 2 to 3 letters lower. The evaluator also examined Mrs. Holloway's classroom participation records, which teachers were required to keep. The records showed that black students raised their hands frequently, but were called on significantly less often than their white peers. When they were called on, the average length of Mrs. Holloway's responses was notably shorter. The evaluator interviewed students who reported that Mrs. Holloway often seemed impatient or dismissive when black students asked questions, but encouraging and supportive when white students asked similar questions. Former students came forward during the investigation, emboldened by Maya's courage. Students who had graduated years ago who had carried the weight of Mrs. Holloway's dismissiveness into their college years, who had struggled to rebuild confidence that she had systematically destroyed. One student, now a junior at a state university, said, "I almost dropped out of college my freshman year because I was so convinced I couldn't write well enough. Mrs. Holloway had told me I wasn't college material. It took 2 years of therapy and supportive professors to undo the damage she did to my self-image." The evaluator's report concluded, there is substantial evidence of racially biased grading practices. Students of color consistently received lower grades with less instructional feedback, creating a pattern that cannot be explained by objective quality differences in the work submitted. Evidence suggests either conscious bias or deeply ingrained unconscious bias that has affected Mrs. Holloway's assessment of student work for years. The pattern is too consistent, too pronounced, and too closely correlated with student race to be attributable to chance or to legitimate differences in academic performance. The report made additional findings that Mrs. Holloway's letters of recommendation showed a pattern of lukewarm endorsements for students of color compared to glowing recommendations for white students with similar or sometimes lower grades. That her classroom management showed disparities in how she responded to similar behaviors from white students versus students of color. that several students of color had requested transfers out of her classes, citing discomfort and feeling unwelcome, but these requests had been documented without follow-up investigation. The school board held a closed meeting to discuss the findings. Meyer and her mother were not allowed to attend, but Ms. Davis kept them updated, calling Maya's mother after each development. The teachers' union defended Mrs. Holloway vigorously, arguing that subjective grading was within a teacher's professional discretion, that the evaluation was flawed, that examining grading patterns by race was itself inappropriate and promoted reverse discrimination. The union representative argued that Mrs. Holloway had taught successfully for 17 years and that one complaint shouldn't destroy her career. Some board members expressed concern about rushing to judgment, about destroying a teacher's reputation without absolute proof, about the slippery slope of examining everything through a racial lens. These board members pointed out that Mrs. Holloway had never been reprimanded before, that she had received positive evaluations, that many white students and some students of color praised her teaching. They worried about the precedent of allowing student complaints to override professional judgment. Others pointed out that the pattern was too consistent to ignore, that the statistical evidence was compelling, that multiple students across multiple years reported similar experiences, that the external evaluator's findings were thorough and damning. These board members argued that the district had a legal and moral obligation to address clear evidence of discriminatory practices, that protecting one teacher's career was less important than protecting countless students from harm. The debate stretched over multiple meetings. Maya's mother attended the public portions, sitting in the audience with other parents who had children affected by Mrs. Holloway's teaching. Some of these parents were angry, demanding accountability. Others were defensive, insisting their children had loved Mrs. Holloway's class and that this was all an overreaction. The meetings became contentious, with parents shouting at each other, with accusations flying about racism and false allegations and protecting the real victims. The local newspaper picked up the story. A journalist interviewed Maya, her mother, several former students, and the school administration. The article painted a complex picture of a school grappling with evidence of racial bias in a system that made addressing such bias extremely difficult. The article sparked debates in the community. Some readers praised Maya's courage. Others accused her of destroying a good teacher's career over a single bad grade. The comments section became vicious, with people Maya had never met calling her a liar, a troublemaker, someone playing victim. Maya read those comments late at night, tears streaming down her face, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Her mother found her crying over her laptop and gently closed it. "Baby, don't read that poison. Those people don't know you. They don't know what happened. They're just afraid. Change always scares people, especially when it challenges them to examine their own biases. But what if they're right? What if I'm ruining her life over nothing?" "You're not ruining her life. She ruined her own credibility by treating students differently based on their race. You're just holding up a mirror. If she doesn't like what she sees reflected, that's her problem, not yours. And this isn't about one bad grade, Maya. You know that. This is about years of students having their dreams crushed. This is about a system that protects teachers who harm black and brown children. Don't let them make you feel guilty for telling the truth." The final decision came through in early April, after 6 weeks of investigation, debate, and community controversy. The superintendent released a statement. Mrs. Holloway would not be fired. The teachers' union had negotiated to protect her position, arguing that the contract required progressive discipline and that immediate termination was not warranted for a first offense, even one as serious as this. Instead, she was placed on a professional improvement plan that required her to undergo training on implicit bias and culturally responsive teaching. She was required to provide detailed feedback on all student work, with minimum standards for the number and quality of comments. Her grades would be subject to review by the department head for the remainder of the school year. She would be observed regularly by administrators. Any future complaints would be investigated immediately. Maya's grade was changed from an F to an A, as were several of her other assignments that had been undergraded. All 3 black students in the class had their grades reviewed and adjusted upward. The school issued a formal apology to Maya and her family, acknowledging that she had been treated unfairly and that the school had failed in its duty to ensure equitable treatment of all students. The apology was carefully worded by lawyers, acknowledging fault without admitting to deliberate discrimination in a way that might open the district to lawsuits. But Mrs. Holloway remained in the classroom. She remained teaching students, shaping futures, holding power over young people's dreams. The improvement plan was scheduled to last for 1 semester, after which she could return to normal teaching duties if she showed adequate progress. Maya's mother was furious when she heard the decision. She called the superintendent directly, her voice shaking with rage. "This is what you call accountability, training. She destroyed children's confidence for years, and she gets to keep her job. What message does this send to black families? That our children don't matter, that teachers can discriminate with impunity as long as they agree to take a workshop." The superintendent responded with bureaucratic language about union contracts, about due process, about the complexity of personnel decisions. He emphasized that the district was taking this seriously, that the monitoring would be rigorous, that Mrs. Holloway would face consequences if she didn't improve. But his words felt hollow, inadequate. Principal Thompson explained to Maya and her mother that terminating a tenured teacher was extremely difficult without multiple documented incidents and a lengthy formal process. The union contract provided significant protections that were negotiated over decades, designed to prevent arbitrary firings. Even with the external evaluator's findings, even with testimony from multiple students, the legal threshold for immediate termination was high. The best they could do within the system was monitoring and mandatory training. "The system is broken," Maya's mother said flatly. "A system that protects a teacher who harms children over the children themselves is fundamentally broken." Principal Thompson looked uncomfortable but didn't disagree. "I understand your frustration, I do, but these are the constraints we're working within." Maya felt the bitter taste of partial victory. She had been vindicated, her suspicions confirmed, but the system that had protected Mrs. Holloway for 17 years remained largely intact. She had exposed the problem, but couldn't force a solution. She had proven discrimination, but couldn't ensure accountability. The adults with power had acknowledged the harm, but had chosen not to enact consequences that matched the severity of that harm. What Maya didn't know, couldn't have known until later, was that her courage to speak up had set something else in motion. 2 months after the investigation concluded, 3 more families came forward with complaints about Mrs. Holloway's treatment of their children, emboldened by Maya's documentation and the validation of the external investigation. These families had been silent before, afraid of retaliation, afraid of being dismissed, afraid of being labeled troublemakers, but Maya had created a path. She had shown that speaking up was possible, that evidence could be gathered, that patterns could be exposed. Then 5 more families came forward, then 2 more. Each brought their own documentation, their own experiences, their own stories of children who had been told they weren't smart enough, weren't college material, should lower their expectations. The trickle became a flood. The pressure on the administration intensified. The local NAACP chapter got involved, demanding a comprehensive review of racial equity in the school district. The state education department began asking questions about the district's response to documented discrimination. By the end of the school year, Mrs. Holloway announced her early retirement. The official statement said she was leaving to pursue other opportunities, to spend more time with family, to explore new chapters in her life, but everyone knew the truth. The pressure had become too great. The scrutiny too intense. She couldn't operate in the shadows anymore. Even with her union protection, even with her tenure, the environment had become untenable. Every grade she gave would be questioned. Every interaction with students of color would be scrutinized. Parents were requesting that their children not be placed in her classes. The administration, while unable to fire her, had made clear through their monitoring that they were watching constantly. In her place, the school hired Ms. Angela Torres, a young Latina teacher who had graduated from an MFA program in creative writing and had spent 2 years teaching in an urban school district with a predominantly black and brown student population. Ms. Torres brought energy, explicit anti-bias training, and a commitment to seeing every student's potential. She read every word her students wrote and filled their papers with encouraging, specific feedback. She called on students equitably, tracked her own participation patterns to ensure she wasn't falling into unconscious bias, and created a classroom environment where every student felt valued. The difference was immediate and striking. Marcus, who had struggled all year in Mrs. Holloway's class, thrived under Ms. Torres. His essays received detailed feedback that helped him improve, and by the end of summer school, where he had enrolled to make up credits, he was writing with confidence again. Jasmine, who had considered dropping out of honors English, stayed in the program and began to love writing again. The incoming freshman class of black and brown students who would have had Mrs. Holloway instead had Ms. Torres, and they flourished. Maya finished sophomore year with straight A's, her GPA restored, her confidence battered but not broken. She spent the summer working on her college application essays, but this time with Ms. Torres's guidance. Ms. Torres encouraged her, pushed her to dig deeper, helped her find her voice. Meyer also attended a journalism workshop for students from underrepresented communities, a program she found through Ms. Davis. At the workshop, she met other young journalists of color, heard from professionals who looked like her, learned from teachers who believed in her potential. She wrote an article about her experience for the workshop's publication, not naming Mrs. Holloway, but describing the pattern of bias, the importance of documentation, the power of speaking up. The article was reprinted in several education journals. Teachers across the country used it in their classes to discuss racial equity in education. Meyer received emails from students who had experienced similar situations, thanking her for giving voice to their experiences, for showing them they weren't crazy, weren't imagining it, weren't alone. She never forgot what Mrs. Holloway had tried to do to her. She never forgot the feeling of seeing that undeserved F, the humiliation, the moment of doubt when she questioned her own abilities, when she wondered if maybe she really wasn't smart enough, wasn't talented enough, wasn't worthy of her dreams. That moment of doubt haunted her, but it also fueled her. It made her more determined to succeed, to prove wrong everyone who tried to limit her, to achieve what others said was impossible. But she also never forgot that she had fought back, that she had trusted herself enough to say, "Something is wrong here, and I deserve better," that she had gathered evidence, built a case, refused to accept dismissal and degradation, that she had spoken up not just for herself, but for every student who came before and every student who would come after. 3 years later, Maya was accepted to Columbia University's journalism school with a full scholarship. Her college essay, the one she had written in Mrs. Holloway's class, the one that had received an F, the one that had sparked everything, was cited by the admissions committee as one of the strongest they had read that year. They praised its emotional authenticity, its narrative clarity, its mature voice, its unflinching honesty. The essay that Mrs. Holloway had dismissed without reading became the essay that opened the door to Maya's dream school. She called Ms. Park, the professor who had first validated her writing, to share the good news. Ms. Park laughed with joy, a sound of pure celebration. "I told you that you had talent. I knew it from the first time I read your work. I'm so glad you didn't let anyone convince you otherwise. You trusted yourself, and look where it's gotten you. Columbia is lucky to have you." Maya thought about all the students who had come before her, the ones who had let Mrs. Holloway's assessments define their futures, who had abandoned their dreams because they believed they weren't good enough, who had accepted diminished expectations as truth. She thought about Amani, who had lost scholarship opportunities and had to take the long route through community college. About Carlos, who had been tracked into lower-level classes and had to fight for years to get back on track. About all the silent victims who never spoke up because they assumed the problem was them, because society had taught them to doubt themselves before doubting authority, because challenging a teacher seemed impossible and dangerous. Before leaving for Columbia, Maya wrote an article for the school newspaper about implicit bias in education, about the responsibility teachers hold, about the importance of students trusting their own abilities even when authority figures try to diminish them. She didn't name Mrs. Holloway, but everyone knew who she was writing about. The article became the most read piece the school newspaper had ever published. It was shared on social media, discussed in classrooms, referenced in school board meetings. The article ended with these words: "When a teacher fails to see a student's potential, they're not just giving a bad grade. They're closing doors, limiting possibilities, stealing futures. Students of color, especially, are taught to doubt themselves, to accept others' low expectations as truth, to believe that our struggles reflect our inadequacies rather than systemic bias. But we are not what prejudiced teachers say we are. We are what we know ourselves to be. Trust your voice, trust your work, trust your intelligence and your worth. And when someone tries to crush your dreams without even doing you the courtesy of reading what you've written, fight back. Document everything. Find allies. Speak up. Demand accountability. Because your dreams are worth fighting for, and nobody has the right to take them from you without a fight. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not imagining it, and you deserve better. We all deserve better. This wasn't just Maya's story. This is happening in schools across America, across the UK, across the world right now at this very moment. Teachers with racial bias, conscious or unconscious, are grading students differently, calling on them less frequently, discouraging their ambitions, tracking them out of advanced courses, destroying confidence, limiting possibilities. They're doing it in suburban schools and urban schools, in public schools and private schools, in elementary classrooms and university lecture halls. And most students never speak up because they assume the problem is them, not the system. They internalize the low grades, the dismissive comments, the lack of encouragement. They adjust their dreams downward. They choose safer paths. They accept limitations that were imposed on them rather than chosen by them. The research backs this up. Studies show that teachers of all races, even black teachers, often have lower expectations for black students. They grade identical work more harshly when they believe it was written by a black student. They interpret identical behavior as more threatening or disruptive when exhibited by black students compared to white students. They recommend black students for special education and remedial classes at higher rates and for gifted programs at lower rates, even when test scores don't justify these disparities. The bias is documented, studied, proven. It's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact, so here's what I need you to do. If you're a student and this story sounds familiar, if you've experienced teachers who seem to grade you more harshly than your peers, who dismiss your questions, who discourage your ambitions, document everything. Keep copies of your work before you submit it. Save all graded assignments. Note the feedback you receive compared to other students. Compare your treatment with classmates. Ask trusted adults to review your work independently. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, but back up those instincts with evidence. Build your case carefully, thoroughly, undeniably. If you're a parent and your child's grades suddenly drop with a new teacher, especially if your child is black or brown, ask questions. Request detailed feedback. Ask to see examples of what excellent work looks like. Compare your child's work to the examples provided. Don't accept vague explanations like the work isn't good enough, or your child needs to try harder. Demand specifics. What exactly needs improvement? How can your child improve? Why did this specific assignment receive this specific grade? Request meetings, bring documentation. Don't be intimidated by credentials or experience. Trust your child. Believe them when they tell you something feels wrong. If you're an educator watching this, examine your own practices honestly and courageously. Look at your grade distributions by race. Are they equitable? Are you providing equal feedback to all students? Are you calling on everyone equally? Track it. Count it. Be honest about what the numbers show. Are you holding the same high expectations for every student regardless of their background? Do you truly believe that all students can achieve excellence? Or do you harbor unconscious beliefs about which students are likely to succeed and which are likely to struggle? Those beliefs shape your teaching, whether you acknowledge them or not. Get training on implicit bias. Read about culturally responsive teaching. Seek out diverse perspectives. Make yourself uncomfortable. Growth requires discomfort. Drop a comment below if you've experienced something similar. Share this video with every parent, every student, every educator who needs to see it. Hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep telling these stories. Keep exposing these patterns. Keep fighting for every young person whose dreams are being crushed by people who are supposed to nurture them. We're going to keep speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when people don't want to hear it, even when it challenges systems that have operated unchecked for generations. Maya fought back and won, but she shouldn't have had to fight in the first place. A 15-year-old girl shouldn't have to conduct an investigation, gather evidence, withstand social ostracism, and battle a system designed to protect adults over children just to get fair treatment in a classroom. That's not a victory. That's a failure of every adult and every system that was supposed to protect her. Let's make sure the next generation doesn't face this battle alone. Share your city in the comments, share your story, share your experiences with bias in education. Let's build a community that demands better for our children, that holds systems accountable, that refuses to accept discrimination as normal or acceptable. Let's create classrooms where every student is seen, valued, encouraged, and given a fair chance to succeed. Because every young person deserves a teacher who sees their potential, reads their work, provides meaningful feedback, and helps them reach for their dreams instead of crushing them before they even have a chance to fly. Every student deserves to walk into a classroom and know that their teacher believes in them, will grade them fairly, will invest in their success. That shouldn't be a luxury or a matter of luck. It should be a guarantee. Until it is, we'll keep telling these stories, we'll keep fighting, we'll keep demanding change, and we'll keep reminding students like Maya that they are worthy, capable, and deserving of every opportunity they work for, no matter what any biased teacher tries to tell them.